What does poverty really mean? When we hear the word poverty, I think many of us imagine extreme situations, like homelessness, starvation, or people living in very poor conditions. But poverty is far more complex and far more widespread than often people realise. According to the United Nations, more than 700 million people, around 10% of the world's population, still live in extreme poverty. These people are surviving on less than $2 a day. And despite decades of progress, this number is rising again. But poverty is not only about income. Poverty is also connected to healthcare access, education, decent work, social protections, and the power to make choices about your own life. Poverty is deeply connected to human rights. Issues like child labour and forced labour and human trafficking are direct consequences of poverty and economic insecurity. This is why poverty remains one of the most important global issues today, and why no poverty is the #1 goal in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. In this Thinking in English episode, I want to explore what poverty really is, how it's measured, why people fall into poverty and struggle to escape it, whether it's actually possible to reduce or even end poverty, and finally think about how the language we use to talk about poverty changes the way we understand it. You can find an ad-free version of this episode, no ads, no sponsors, on my Patreon. The link is in the description. Here is today's vocabulary list. Poverty. Poverty. The condition of lacking enough money, resources, or opportunities to meet basic needs and live with dignity. For example, poverty is connected to income, access to education, and healthcare. Absolute. Absolute. Complete and not influenced by comparison. For example, absolute poverty refers to a situation where people cannot meet basic survival needs. Relative. Relative. Measured in comparison to others or to a specific context rather than by a fixed standard. As in, relative poverty depends on the cost of living in a particular society. Access. Access. The ability or opportunity to use, reach, or obtain something important. As in, many people lack access to affordable healthcare and education. Insecurity. Insecurity. A state of uncertainty or a lack of safety, stability, or protection. For example, job insecurity makes it difficult for people to plan for the future. Opportunity. Opportunity. A chance or possibility to improve one's situation. For example, education can create opportunities for people to escape poverty. Median. Median. The middle value in a set of numbers where half are higher and half are lower. As in, relative poverty is often defined as earning less than half of the median income. What do we actually mean when we talk about poverty? I think the simplest definition of poverty is not having enough resources, money or food or shelter, to live with dignity. But this is only the starting point. Poverty is also about health, education, opportunity, safety, and power. The United Nations is very clear on this. Poverty is multidimensional. A person can have an income and still be poor. Someone can be working and still unable to afford healthcare or housing or education. Poverty is often about lack of access. To understand this better, it helps to look at different types of poverty. Absolute poverty is the most extreme and visible form of poverty, and the type most people think of when they hear the word poverty. It refers to a situation where people lack the basic necessities for survival. When people don't have enough food, clean water, clothing, or healthcare. Absolute poverty is usually measured using an international poverty line, which is currently set around $3 a day, I think. If you earn less money than this, you are in absolute poverty. According to global estimates, around 700 to 760 million people worldwide still live in absolute poverty. Relative poverty looks very different. Relative poverty looks at whether a person has enough resources to live well and survive in the society they live in. Relative poverty is measured in comparison to others in the same community as you. Experts often define this type of poverty as living on less than half of the median income in a country or region. This type of poverty is common in wealthy nations. If you have a job in the UK or the US or Canada or Japan, you are most likely, almost definitely, above the absolute poverty line. But this does not mean you have enough money to live well in your society. Take the US as an example. The federal, meaning national poverty line in the US in 2018 was $12,140 for an individual. But in San Francisco, a city with an incredibly high cost of living, an individual earning $82,000 a year in 2018 was considered low income by government standards. While $82,000 a year sounds like an amazing salary in most of the world and most of the USA, in San Francisco, the median rent for a one-bedroom apartment is around $3,500. After taxes and high costs for food, a person might still struggle to meet their basic needs, even on a great salary. In fact, in many developed countries, around 1 in 6 people might live in relative poverty, and this shows that poverty exists everywhere. This brings us to multidimensional poverty, which is a concept strongly supported and talked about by the UN. Multidimensional poverty recognizes that income alone does not explain people's lives. Poverty also includes limited access to education or poor healthcare. It could also include unsafe housing or no housing, a lack of security or limited opportunities. For example, someone might earn slightly above the international poverty line, but live in unsafe housing with no healthcare and have no schooling. On paper, they are not absolutely poor, but in reality, their options are extremely limited. Poverty can also be understood in terms of time. Situational poverty is caused by sudden events. You may find yourself in poverty or below the poverty line after losing your job, maybe becoming seriously ill, or experiencing a natural disaster like a hurricane or an earthquake, or living through a conflict. This type of poverty is often temporary, but without support it can become long-term. Generational poverty, on the other hand, is passed down from one generation to the next. Children born into poverty often lack good education, safe housing, and stable jobs. So, as adults, they are far more likely to remain poor themselves. This creates a cycle that is extremely difficult to break. Now we know a little about the different types of poverty, let's take a few minutes to think about measuring poverty. The most common way to measure poverty is through poverty lines. I've mentioned these already in the episode. At the global level, organizations like the World Bank and UN use an international poverty line, which is currently set around $3 a day. This line is designed to measure extreme and absolute poverty. However, this figure is not meant to describe what a decent life looks like everywhere. It is a minimum across the world. It is not a comfortable standard of living. That's why countries also use their own national poverty lines. These are set based on local costs and living standards. Some cities and regions also have their own, like how in San Francisco, the poverty line or low income line for an individual is over $80,000 a year. What counts as poverty in one country may be very different in another. The poverty line in a high-income country is much higher than in a low-income one, because housing and food and transport are all more expensive. Traditionally, poverty has been measured using income, measuring how much money people earn or spend. But income doesn't tell us how people actually live. Two people with the same income may have very different lives depending on where they live or their education. Even in the same city, one person may have access to affordable housing, while another person has to pay 2 or 3 times more for their apartment. Because of this, many organizations also look at living standards, which measures more than just income. But measuring poverty has serious limitations. A dollar goes much further in some countries or regions than others. Even within the same country, living costs can vary hugely between cities and rural areas. For example, my income is good for where I live in Japan. It would be okay for the suburbs of Tokyo, but I would be poor in some areas of central Tokyo and probably really poor in a place like New York. Another problem is informal work. Hundreds of millions of people earn money through informal or undocumented jobs. Their income is unstable, unpredictable, and often invisible in official statistics. And there is also hidden poverty. Some people earn just above the poverty line but still struggle to afford housing or food or healthcare. Measuring poverty is obviously necessary, but it will never be exact. It will always be an approximation. Why does poverty exist in the first place? Well, I don't think there is one single cause of poverty. Instead, poverty is usually the result of multiple different factors. One of the most direct causes is economic insecurity. Many people are poor because their work is unstable or badly paid. Unemployment, informal jobs, underemployment and low wages all make it difficult to plan for the future. Even in wealthy countries, millions of people have jobs but still can't afford housing or basic services. Education also plays a long-term role in poverty. Limited access to education or poor quality education reduces your opportunities. If you are unable to read, write, or do basic mathematics, you're obviously going to have fewer job opportunities and a lower average earning potential. This creates a cycle. Children born into poor families are more likely to attend underfunded schools or leave education early, which increases their risk of poverty as adults. Health and poverty are also deeply connected. Illness can push people into poverty by reducing their ability to work or forcing them to spend large amounts of money on their health. In countries without strong or universal healthcare, like the USA, medical costs are one of the leading causes of financial hardship. At the same time, poverty increases health risks. Poor health leads to poverty, and poverty leads to poor health. Social and political systems also affect who experiences poverty. Discrimination, for example, can limit people's access to education or jobs. Conflict and war are among the most extreme causes of poverty. Violence destroys infrastructure, it disrupts education, it displaces people, and it collapses economies. And poverty is, of course, influenced by global forces. Climate change, for example, is already increasing poverty by destroying crops and homes and livelihoods, especially in countries that depend on agriculture. And natural disasters hit poorer communities hardest because they have fewer resources to recover. Finally, global inequality also matters. Things like trade systems and debt and unequal access to technology mean that some countries will struggle to develop even when their populations are working hard. You may have heard the term poverty trap before. The basic idea is that poverty traps people. Once they are in poverty, it's difficult to escape. Poverty is a cycle. Once someone falls into poverty, a series of linked problems can keep them there, even if they work hard or make responsible choices. Each problem reinforces the next, making escape from the poverty trap difficult. One common poverty trap looks like this. Low income leads to poor nutrition and limited access to healthcare. This makes the person ill. The person's poor health then reduces their ability to work consistently or productively. This leads to even lower income, and the cycle continues. Another trap involves financial insecurity. People living in poverty often have no savings. This means that an unexpected cost, like a medical bill or your refrigerator breaking or a family emergency, must be paid for with debt. Debt usually comes with high interest rates, especially for people with no access to banking or poor credit. Over time, repayments take up more and more income, making it even harder to save or invest for the future. Poverty becomes self-reinforcing. Opportunities that could help people escape poverty, like moving or education, require money and time, which are the things that people in poverty often lack. So, can poverty actually be ended, or can it only be reduced? First, it's useful to make a distinction. Reducing poverty means lowering the number of people living in poverty and improving living standards. Ending poverty suggests eliminating it completely. Most experts agree that ending poverty everywhere, especially relative poverty, may be extremely difficult, but reducing poverty significantly is clearly possible. Over the past few decades, the world has made real progress. Hundreds of millions of people have moved out of extreme poverty, especially in parts of East Asia. Governments play a very important role in this. Things like social safety nets are important. These are systems that support people when they are unemployed, sick, elderly, or caring for others. These include unemployment benefits or child support or pensions. Policies like minimum wages and labour protections can also help ensure that people are not trapped in low-paid, insecure jobs. Education is one of the most powerful tools for reducing poverty. Education for women and girls is particularly effective. Studies consistently show that when women are educated, families tend to be healthier, incomes rise, and communities are more stable. Poverty is a global issue, and many responses are international. Non-governmental organizations, development agencies, and international institutions provide aid, build infrastructure, and support education in lower-income countries. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are aiming to keep governments accountable. So to end this episode, I'd like to think a little bit about how we talk about poverty. Language matters. It influences how we think, feel, and act. Consider the difference between these two phrases. The poor, people living in poverty. The first turns a complex group of individuals into a single label, the poor. The second reminds us that poverty is a condition. It's something people are facing, not their identity. People living in poverty. They are still people. This may sound like a small difference, but it does affect how much empathy we feel and whether we see something as changeable, whether we see poverty as changeable. Language carries hidden judgments and bias. Words like lazy, dependent, and undeserving are sometimes used, directly or indirectly, to describe people in poverty. These stereotypes suggest that poverty is the result of bad choices or weak character. But as we've seen throughout this episode, poverty is often caused by other factors, like low wages or poor health or lack of education, discrimination, natural disasters or conflict. The media and politicians play a powerful role in how poverty is discussed. Newspaper headlines may focus on individual stories taken out of context, rather than the long-term trends or causes of poverty. And political language often frames poverty as a cost to society rather than a sign of deeper problems. Poverty is a sign that your country, your society, has economic and social problems. It's not a sign that these people are causing damage to your country. It is a sign that your country is already damaged. If poverty is something that people do to themselves, the solution is these people need to be punished or controlled. But if we see poverty as a shared social challenge, a consequence of our society, well then solutions tend to appear in opportunity or support or prevention. So here is today's final thought. Poverty is not simple. It is multidimensional and influenced by income, health, education, work, powers and opportunity. It's influenced by personal circumstances and also by economic systems, policies and structures. There's no single cause of poverty and no single solution. Ending poverty completely is probably unrealistic, at least in the short term, but reducing poverty, reducing suffering, and reducing inequality are clearly achievable. But what do you think? What is the poverty line in your country? How does your society talk about poverty or people in poverty? Let me know by leaving a comment. You can comment on YouTube, on Spotify, or if you're a Patreon subscriber, comment on Patreon. Patreon is where I have my community, the Thinking in English community. You can join, support the podcast, support me, and also get some great benefits. Every Monday, there is an ad-free version of this episode. On Fridays, completely exclusive bonus episodes. There are conversation clubs on Tuesdays and Thursdays, a film club once a month, discounts, conversations with me, and much more. Click the link in the bio or go to patreon.com/thinkinginenglish to learn more and join. Thank you all so much for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Goodbye.